All right, let's go there, but I'm a little bit nervous. Why was Jeffrey Epstein able to get all of these people much richer than him into his orbit? That's the question you should be asking. So here's my theory.
Okay.
Just be careful. What happens when you become a billionaire? I don't know. Not there. Nowhere close. What happens is that you find out that it's not what you thought it was. First of all, you now have staff everywhere. You can't move around easily because you need a security detail, right? When I first met Peter Thiel, I said, wow, your security detail on this beach is amazing. I can't even tell where they are. He says, am I supposed to have a security detail? I'm like, Peter, you've got to be kidding. Now he's got one. So the first thing is that you find you lose your privacy, you lose your freedom of movement. You've got a retinue of people who have to be constantly maintained. They're under your roof. And you're like, this isn't what I signed up for. I wanted to be rich. You're like, well, you are rich. You can buy things. Well, you can't buy privacy. You can't buy freedom. You can't buy anonymity, all these things that you want. And you can't buy the ability to do fun, naughty stuff. I'm not talking about little kids. I'm saying, like, if you're going to take drugs, you're at risk of, having everybody want to tell the story. If you want to have a menage, you're at the same risk. So the question becomes, what do I do to get what I thought I was going to do, which is the right to have freedom over my own life and to misbehave in fun ways, whatever. Nobody can figure out how to do it. Jeffrey Epstein could do it. Now, why is it that he could do it? Who's spoken to the contractors who built his island? It's the most obvious thing to do. If I was an investigative journalist, that's what I'd do. I'd talk to, like, the plumbers, the maids, all of the people who are just working for a living. Those are the people who constantly leak information about their employers. Well, who's the only person who has the ability to build something? The CIA has its own construction company. Sovereigns, countries, nations have the ability to do stuff where they know how to keep things under wraps. If you think about S4, I guarantee you there's a men's room at S4. Well, who cleans it? That's a really important question because that's the weak link. And so rich people haven't figured out how to be rich. That's what everybody was attracted to in that upper income bracket.
That he would provide them with experiences.
He would provide them with things that they couldn't figure out how anybody could provide because they were dealing with a state. I assure you that the Sultan of Brunei knows how to do stuff because he's both an individual and a state. Most of us are either in this sort of black ops world or we're dreaming about being very rich or just normal human beings. The very rich are very disappointed. Epstein felt rich, as I said before, in a movie sense. He had freedom. He could say and do things that other people couldn't. Elon is constantly tripping over the fact that I think he's a wild guy. I'm up for wild guys. I want cowboy billionaires, cowboy physicists, cowboy everything. But in general, we don't want cowboys. And, again, this has nothing to do with little kids. That's a different thing.
Right.
But if you want to go take drugs, take drugs. If you want to have a menage, fine. I don't want to hear about it. Don't spill the tea. I can't stand this culture. Epstein knew how to keep quiet stuff quiet. And why is that? His product, as I've said before, was silence. If you want a really dangerous question, ask the question, what did the people who were in his direct orbit have an unusually high number of disappearances around them?
Did they?
I don't know. But it's a dangerous question. I've never investigated it. But have you ever seen, everybody talks about Eyes Wide Shut now.
Mm-hmm.
You notice that nobody talks about crimes and misdemeanors? Where Woody Allen is directly in his orbit?
God, I don't even know if I've seen that movie.
There is a scene where Martin Landau and Jerry Orbach's characters are a pair of brothers. I think that they only meet on screen once. And Martin Landau's having an affair, and the woman has decided that she has rights. And Martin Landau is a very wealthy ophthalmologist or something like that. And he has a brother who's a starker. Starker being the Yiddish word for a tough guy. And it's one of the most... Can we find Jerry Orbach, Martin Landau, Crimes and Misdemeanors? Is the most blood-curdling, so well done.
Which, the scene description, though, you didn't really get to it.
Well, they're only in one... If they're only in one scene together, they'll be at a... I haven't seen it in ages, but my memory is that they're at a house walking around a pool, and then they walk inside to the pool house. And there's a resentment that the brother who's in the life is only called to the house occasionally, right? And it's this way in which the genteel and the people who can get things done that you're not allowed to do within the law are connected. And so Woody Allen is clearly writing this from personal experience. He has some interaction between being in high society and knowing Starkers. And I actually knew Woody Allen's old producer is the father of a friend of mine, so a guy named Jack Grossberg. And Jack Grossberg was an epitome of a tough Jew in Hollywood who would deal with the Teamsters or when there was a labor dispute. And, he wasn't in the life, but he was a guy who could stare down a mafioso. I think that in part Woody Allen is writing about what Jeffrey Epstein was providing, which was a measure of silence. So while everybody's watching Kubrick, this is a guy in Epstein's direct orbit. This is what Epstein was. He was a Starker. He was a science spy. He was a Starker. He had buttons. And we're just all pretending like we have no memory of this, no idea about how we're all connected, how the highest in society are connected to the people who get things done.
And blackmail.
Blackmail is a lot, like we're over-indexed on, in my opinion. Again,
Okay.
Who am I? I'm just a guest. But
this is this assumption.
Well,
Is
look,
that he
I was
held
very
things over
early
people?
saying he was a construct when nobody
Right.
would listen. Here's the next piece of it. I think he had buttons. He had button men at his control. He made problems disappear. Things went away. That's how you make sure that you have the experience of being a king rather than a billionaire. The billionaires had more money than him, but they didn't have the ability to make their problems go away. And by the way, I'm not suggesting that all the people in his orbit were availing themselves of this as a service. But if I was a competent investigator, I would be talking to Woody Allen and saying, what did you mean by that scene? Look.
Because you think that scene is directly connected to Woody Allen's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein.
No, I think that scene is directly connected to the connection between Hollywood and Teamsters and unions and organized crime. There are people who know how to make things happen that aren't within the law. What is the mafia? We watch all these mafia pictures, right?
Mm-hmm.
The mafia is about contract enforcement when you can't use the courts. That doesn't sound like what the mafia is, but that's what it is. It's a business. What happens when you're in an illegal business and you can't enforce a contract? Right?
Yeah.
You have to use muscle. So we use genteel. Like he says, she can be taught. You want me to talk to her? We can handle it. This is the genteel language of roughing somebody up, killing somebody, and making problems go away. So the mafia is about business. It's not about violence.
Okay, so his connection to scientists, though, what was the purpose of that?
We don't know, but I keep saying...
What's your assumption?
My assumption is that he was a clearinghouse. that somebody set him up at fair expense. I'm going to say 9-figure expense. So I think this was a 9-figure fortune, hundreds of millions. And what it had the trappings of multi-billionaire. It had trillionaire written all over it for a 9-figure fortune. So it's orders of magnitude off of what it was. And I believe that was only possible because there was a collection of sovereigns behind him. I don't think it was one nation. I think it was a bunch of countries. And the most obvious country is not Israel. It's the U.S. because he was operating on U.S. soil. Do I think Israel was involved? Certainly. Do I think that the UK was involved? I do. Saudi Arabia? I do. I think that this was a massive piece of structure confused with a sex scandal and a blackmail operation. And we're all sort of taking the bait.
So the sex scandal and all the sex stuff was sort of to keep people happy and give people a place to go to where they could have these experiences. If you're dealing with physicists or some high-end scientist guy, they don't have access to this. They probably have never been with a beautiful woman in their life. All of a sudden they're hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein.
Joe.
I'm not talking about you, bitch.
No, I'm not talking about me either.
I'm sure you're fine.
Ain't talking about love.
Let's be realistic. Most of these guys they're not hot, right? And then all of a sudden they're around 10s who are giving them back massages and drugs are being used and there's this feeling of anonymity, of safety. You can get away with this. Everybody else is doing it. It's been going on for decades. It's fine. This is a place you go. And it's fun, and they look forward to it. And they probably also do have intellectual discussions because you are surrounded by...
Who wouldn't want in?
Right. Right. And so that's how he ropes you in.
That's right.
But, so what is his... Why scientists? And what would be the benefit of having access to these scientists and having this place on Zorro Ranch and being able to talk to these people?
Think about it from the perspective of who is doing the constructing rather than the constructed. So he's the construct.
Okay.
He's an incompetent. He just lied to Steve Bannon. You see him touch his face, classic tell of lying.
Touching your face is a classic tell of lying?
If you looked at what he just did.
He did answering the question. Okay.
100%.
So he's lying about the information or he's lying about his depth
a liar.
of knowledge?
Yes, he's lying about his depth of knowledge.
Okay.
So how did I know he was a construct? In part, one of the things, like they're dumb tells that we give away. One of his was he was supposed to be a currency trader. And when we say we're trading currency, we're not trading currency. We're trading what are called spot contracts that are to be settled with an exchange of currency in 2 days' time, right? So in other words, if I do a euro trade, it's really a dollar-euro trade, and you and I are going to trade dollars for euros, and we agree to do it in 2 days' time. And then if you want to keep the position on, you exchange that contract for a contract that will follow to erase that contract and form a new contract which pushes it out 2 days. You call that rolling things over.
Okay.
He didn't know that dollar Canada was on a 1-day contract rather than a 2-day contract where everything else. So in other words, there was an anomaly. And anybody in currency trading would have known that. Or I forget whether he didn't know that trading pounds for dollars is called cable in the business. So there were just dumb tells that he didn't know about foreign exchange. Yeah? So, he's claiming to be an FX hedge fund manager to me, and there were stupid tells like that.
Right.
And then he knows way too much about my exactly particular specialty in mathematics. Like the number of people it could have come from would be 5 or fewer. So technically what I did my thesis on is something called self-dual Yang-Mills theory, which is about every force other than gravity is a Yang-Mills force. Except my thesis was really about gravity, and I didn't disclose it, and only people very, very close to me knew that that's what it was about. He was obsessed with gravity. And he shows up, I think, in the Harvard Math Department in 2002 with Dick Gross. And clearly he was talking to people in the Cambridge mathematical physics world who would have been, there's something called the Chern-Simons theory, which is mistakenly associated closely with Yang-Mills theory, but is really all about gravity. And that my work really shows that there is a parent theory that has Chern-Simons theory and gravity as its two consequences. He knows about that without knowing anything about the structure and the subject matter. He knows about the history of my stuff and something called Seiberg-Witten theory. He doesn't know anything concrete. How does he know all this stuff? He was in my world. And he was very focused, on... I met him through Jess Staley, who was at J.P. Morgan. Now, Jess Staley is deeply implicated in this. I didn't know that at the time. And Jeff Epstein has been mirroring my entire life, everything that I do. And I became well known when I was writing these essays for Edge.org, and he was in with John Brockman at the Brockman Literary Agency. When I got married, the rabbi came from Harvard Hillel, which was a building now called Rosofsky Hall, which he put together with Les Wexner's money. He was funding probably the conference at the Perimeter Institute that we did on the financial crisis. At every turn in my life, since I was a young man, Jeffrey Epstein was there in the background, even though I only meet him once.
Why do you think that is?
Because we're interested in the exact same thing.
And what is that?
The most powerful stuff in the universe.
Why is he interested in that? If he doesn't know the
science. So what do I care about? I care about finance and financial markets. I care about the CPI. I care about the fate of Israel. I care about evolutionary theory. I care about mathematics that goes like geometry, like the geometry of elliptic curves, but really more differential geometry. I care about physics. Every time that I care, and I care about the world's smartest people at a functional level, not the people with the highest IQ, but the people who are irreverent enough to actually move the needle. So he and I we're interested in where's the action, where's the high-end intellectual action in the world that actually moves things. And, quite frankly, he was meeting in my offices in San Francisco while I wasn't aware of it in 2017. I didn't know that.